Have you ever felt the urge to abandon everything without knowing exactly why? Not because of physical exhaustion or a specific problem, but due to a deeper discomfort, silent, difficult to explain. Carl Jung knew that feeling well, and far from seeing it as a mistake, he understood it as a signal. We live in an immense world, full of possible paths, yet we spend much of our lives trapped in a very small space. The same streets, the same people, the same routines, the same expectations we did not choose. From a very early age, we learn that staying is the right thing to do, that moving too much is dangerous, that questioning the inherited path is a form of ingratitude. Without realizing it, that idea begins to weigh on us. There is a silent pressure that pushes us to remain where we are, even when that place no longer represents who we truly are. It is not an explicit order. It is an invisible gravity. The world expects you to keep being who you have always been, to fit in, to not disturb the script too much, but life begins to fail when it is lived only out of habit. Carl Jung lived in a time far simpler than ours, without screens or constant noise, and yet he perceived something deeply unsettling. He saw how people lost themselves in routines they had not chosen, working endlessly to sustain lives that did not feel like their own. He was not speaking of material poverty, but of a deeper poverty, that of living disconnected from oneself. And that disconnection does not always show itself as sadness. Sometimes it feels more like a kind of fog. You keep functioning, you talk to people, you comply, you laugh when it is expected, but inside there is a noise that does not fall silent. It is as if a part of you were watching your own life from the outside and thinking, with a disturbing calm, that something is not happening the way it should. And what is strange is that it cannot point to a single clear culprit, because it is not about one problem. It is about a slow accumulation of repetitions. The mind gets used to everything. It gets used to the walls, to the conversations, to the same paths, even to the same versions of yourself. Over time, what is familiar stops feeling real, because you no longer truly see it, you simply pass through it. And when you stop seeing, you also stop feeling, not because you are cold, but because your psyche, in order to save energy, learns to move over what it already believes it understands. That works for survival, but it comes at a cost. The cost is that life turns into a mere procedure. That is why the feeling of wanting to abandon everything appears with that strange mixture of fear and relief. Fear because it implies losing control, relief because it suggests that there is still something alive within you that refuses to fall asleep. Sometimes that impulse is mistaken for a whim, but a whim is wanting something new out of boredom. This is different. This is realizing that you have been breathing for far too long, in a place where the air no longer reaches you. Getting this far already separates you from the rest. Most people do not have the mental strength to hold these truths without running away. That is why I want you to leave your mark and make visible an inner decision that many do not dare to take. Write in the comments, "I decide to stop lying to myself." Let it not be a mechanical habit, but the beginning of your own path toward inner freedom. Now yes, let us continue. There is another piece that often goes unnoticed. You do not only get used to an environment, you also get used to the gaze of others. Without realizing it, the people around you hold an image of you, and that image becomes a soft cage. They do not need to insult you or control you. It is enough that through their gestures and expectations, they remind you who you are supposed to be. Little by little, you begin to act so as not to break that idea. And the worst part is that one day you realize you no longer know if you are this way by choice or by inertia. At that point, leaving everything behind does not sound like escape. It sounds like a way to breathe without witnesses. Because when no one knows your story, you can choose more freely which parts of you to sustain and which ones to let die. That is the psychological part that almost no one talks about. It is not only the place, it is the role you play in that place. It is the character you learn to perform in order to belong. This is where the phrase, "I want to leave," becomes dangerous, because it can mean two opposite things. It can be the need to escape from yourself, or it can be the need to return to yourself. And although they sound similar, inside they are different worlds. Escaping from yourself is trying to erase pain without understanding it. Returning to yourself is accepting pain as a message, as a signal that something is asking to change. Carl Jung understood this difference, even if he did not express it in modern words. For him, it was not exhaustion that was the problem, but a life lived on autopilot. Long before him, other thinkers had already suspected something similar. Some said that traveling cures nothing because the mind travels with you. And it is true, there is a part of you that you cannot leave at a bus station. But it is also true that context pushes you, shapes you, confines you, or opens you. The place where you live is not just a background, it is a constant noise that trains you to feel in a certain way. And when the noise is always the same, you end up believing that this is the only possible music. That is why a change of scenery can feel like a reset, not because it magically turns you into another person, but because it forces you to look again. Novelty awakens something primal. It forces you to pay attention. It pulls you fully into the present moment. When everything is new, you cannot move through life asleep. The mind switches on, and with that activation, a feeling appears that many people forget even exists, the feeling of possibility. Not because everything suddenly becomes easy, but because life stops feeling as if it were already written in advance. However, here comes an uncomfortable truth. If you leave only to numb yourself, the emptiness will follow you. It may take longer to catch up, but it always arrives. Because the enemy is often not the city, nor the family, nor the job. The enemy is a way of living without ever questioning yourself. And that can happen anywhere. You can change countries and repeat the same life with different names, different streets, and the same exhaustion inside. So the real question is not, do I leave or do I stay? The real question is, why do I want to leave? And when that question is answered honestly, it becomes frightening, because it forces you to recognize what you have been avoiding. It forces you to look directly at whether you are living by choice or merely being dragged along. It forces you to admit that perhaps you have been waiting for permission to be yourself, and that permission is not coming. Carl Jung is important here because he did not remain only at the level of ideas, nor did he limit himself to writing about the desire to break away from everything. He treated it as something serious, almost as a moral decision. In his time, the correct life seemed clearly defined: to work, to produce, to maintain an image, to fulfill what was expected. And he looked at all of this with a strange coldness, as if he were observing a crowd, walking in the same direction without asking why. That led him to an unsettling conclusion. Many people live busy lives, but they do not live awake. And when that idea reaches you, the way you look at your own routine begins to change. You start to notice details. How much energy is wasted on things that do not truly matter to you? How many decisions are made to avoid discomfort rather than to build meaning? How much of your life is designed to maintain external calm while something inside slowly fades? The darkest part of all this is simple. Sometimes you do not leave your life because you lack strength. Sometimes you do not do it because you have too much fear. Fear of making mistakes, fear of losing what you have built, fear of disappointing others, fear of being left alone with your own thoughts. Because leaving everything behind is not really about moving away, it is about stopping the lies you tell yourself. And that is harder than any journey. Carl Jung chose to face that difficulty in a way that still unsettles people today. And what he did, even if it seems extreme, follows a simple logic. If noise is confusing you, you need silence. If the world is shaping you without your awareness, you need distance. And if you want to know who you truly are, you need a place where you do not have to perform. In a moment, I will tell you what decision Carl Jung made, what he was truly seeking when he stepped away from the ordinary, and why his gesture was not an escape, but a radical way of returning to what is essential. Carl Jung made a decision that still makes people uncomfortable today because it cannot be reduced to a trend or a simple anecdote. He did not withdraw out of desperation or rejection of the world. He stepped aside in order to look at life without filters. He left the center of noise and chose solitude, not to isolate himself from the world, but to confront it from another position. His gesture was clear and deliberate. He wanted to know what remained when everything unnecessary fell away. He did not surround himself with great comforts, nor did he seek an easy life. What he sought was to strip the experience of existence down to its core. For Carl Jung, everyday life was filled with layers that confused what is essential with what is merely urgent. Excessive work, inherited habits, obligations accepted without question. All of that, in his view, functioned like a veil. And when life is lived behind a veil, a person slowly forgets who they are. There was nothing romantic about that withdrawal. There was cold, solitude, prolonged silence, and precisely there was the point. Silence, not as rest, but as a mirror. When the noise finally fades and the constant stimulation loosens its grip, the questions that are usually pushed aside begin to rise to the surface. They are not comfortable questions, nor are they easy to ignore once they appear. They are honest questions, stripped of performance and expectation. What do you actually want when no one is watching you? What value does your time hold when you are no longer exchanging it for approval, validation, or recognition? Which parts of your life genuinely belong to you, and which parts are nothing more than repetition, habit, or silent obedience to expectations that were never questioned? Carl Jung understood something that remains deeply unsettling even today. Many people are not exhausted because life is too difficult, but because their lives lack meaning. They feel drained, not because they are doing too much, but because they are doing too many things that do not feel like their own. This kind of exhaustion reaches deeper than the body. It settles into the psyche, and it cannot be cured by more sleep, better entertainment, or temporary distractions. It can only be addressed by examining direction, by reconnecting with intention, by reclaiming the forgotten ability to choose consciously. For Jung, stepping back was never about rejecting society or escaping responsibility. It was a deliberate suspension of its demands. By creating distance, he gained clarity. From that distance, he could observe how easily people confuse living with maintaining structures, larger houses that require more upkeep, growing bank accounts that demand constant attention, schedules so full they leave no space for reflection, days filled with activity, yet empty of meaning, lives that look successful on the outside while quietly eroding on the inside. He recognized that this way of living was not an unavoidable fate. It was, in most cases, an unconscious choice. And the most dangerous thing about unconscious choices is that they feel permanent, as if no alternative exists. People endure lives that no longer fit them, simply because they never pause long enough to realize they are allowed to choose differently. What mattered to Carl Jung had nothing to do with asceticism, deprivation, or dramatic sacrifice. It had everything to do with attention, with presence, with refusing to waste one's limited life energy on what does not truly matter. That is why his retreat was not permanent. After 2 years, he returned. This detail is essential because it reveals the true purpose of his withdrawal. Leaving was never the goal. Clarity was. The retreat was a pause, not an escape, a recalibration of perception before re-entering the world. Many people forget this part. Carl Jung did not disappear forever. He did not abandon life. He returned with sharper awareness, with a more refined sense of what deserved his energy and what did not. His act was a conscious interruption of autopilot, a reminder that life is not measured only by how long it lasts, but by how deeply it is lived. And it is here that his experience quietly connects with a feeling you may recognize in yourself. Not a childish fantasy of running away from responsibility, but a mature intuition that something in the way you are living deserves to be examined. A subtle discomfort that does not necessarily ask you to destroy your life, but to look at it honestly. This feeling does not always demand radical change. Often, it asks for something far more difficult: awareness. It asks you to question whether your daily actions still reflect your inner truth, or whether you are simply fulfilling roles assigned by habit, culture, or fear. Discomfort emerges when there is a growing distance between who you are and how you live, when your external life no longer mirrors your inner world, when noise and distraction drown out a simple but unavoidable truth. Time passes, and it does not return. Living distracted is also a way of disappearing. No one else will decide for you what is worth your life. Carl Jung understood that the deepest form of poverty is not material, but existential. It is the absence of awareness. It is letting life happen without actively participating in it. That is why his gesture continues to resonate. It does not invite imitation. It does not suggest that everyone should withdraw from the world. Instead, it confronts us with a far more unsettling question. How much of your life is lived with intention, and how much is merely endured? The strange urge to abandon everything is not madness. It is not weakness. It is often a signal. It does not always call for immediate action, but it always demands attention. It is the most honest part of you knocking quietly, not to destroy what you have built, but to remind you that you are still alive, still conscious, still capable of choosing differently. Perhaps this sensation is not asking you to leave everything behind. Perhaps it is simply asking you to look at your life without illusions, to ask whether what you do each day still carries meaning for you. Because the real danger is not leaving. The real danger is staying in a life that no longer feels like your own.